Hey there, welcome back to another episode of the podcast. And I'm really excited to bring this one to you because it is a very interesting insight into the career of the legend Roger Federer. And we have Christopher Clarey, who is a New York Times correspondent and a top international sports writer. And he is the author of The Master, The Long Run and Beautiful Game of Roger Federer, which just came out yesterday, one day before this podcast has been published. And I'm really excited for you all to check it out. And you should definitely go to the show notes because there I have a link that you can click and get the book. I was privileged enough to get an advance copy, and I started reading it a while back and could not put it down because there were just so many amazing stories, whether or not you're a Roger Federer fan. And one thing that I told Christopher that you'll hear later on is that I didn't expect to learn so much as I did by reading the book, because often these types of books you expect to be entertained and, perhaps moved emotionally. But Christopher also presents a lot of great information for us players who want to improve, because you get a glimpse into how Roger developed in his early years and the type of training that he was exposed to that was novel at the time, and the choices that he made that really highly impacted his career, and who he worked with, who he surrounded himself with. So just an amazing book and a ton of detail, just so detailed. Chris just talked to so many people about Roger, and, obviously details the times when he interviewed Roger on his own, so one-to-one. So I really, really highly encourage you to check out this book, and big shout out to the publisher for making this interview happen. So with that, I am sure you're excited by now to listen to it. So without further ado, here is my interview with Christopher Clarey on Roger Federer. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the podcast. And I'm really, really excited to talk to Christopher Clarey, who has written a fantastic book called The Master, The Long Run and Beautiful Game of Roger Federer. I was privileged enough to be sent an advanced copy, and I can tell you that it's been a fantastic, very insightful read. And, one thing about this book, Chris, is that it also teaches you a lot. Sometimes when you get these types of books, you just expect to be entertained, but there's so much information that, amateur tennis players like myself and the audience can even use to improve themselves on. So I really want to thank you for this amazing book, and thanks for coming on to the podcast as well.
Hey, that means a lot to hear that from you. I appreciate that, especially if you're a player. And, it's my goal with the book. I'm not sure I achieved it, but my goal was that it would be a book that tennis nerds like you and me could pick up and read and get something out of, but also that it would appeal to a general audience that was interested in how you became a champion and how you managed all that and sort of the human side of it. So I'm hoping that it managed to get to both of those audiences. So we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of amazing insights from, his fitness development and kind of revolutionary, training that Federer's trainer gave him to, what he did mentally to stabilize himself, which we'll get into all this stuff. So, but just curious to hear, and I'm sure the audience is as well, what your general interactions were like with Roger when talking to him for the book and for, other pieces as well, how he was like.
Well, basically the idea of the book was I wanted to dig into his process, but I also had so much access to him over the years through the New York Times and the International Herald Tribune, the two papers that I've written for 30 years or so. And so really the book is based on those interviews in terms of him. He didn't cooperate with the book. He's never cooperated with the book yet. He definitely knew I was doing it, and didn't stop me from talking to people or allowing me to do the research I needed to do. But he didn't. As a New York Times writer, I'm actually not allowed to do a book with somebody. Right. So it's an independent project, but it's based on a lot of access to him. I think I never counted the exact number, but I know I did over 20 interviews with him over 20 years, basically. And I've interviewed everybody's, Mirka, even his wife, who doesn't give interviews and hasn't for years and years. I interviewed her, during the early years. So I've had access to everybody at some time or another. And for the book itself, what I really wanted to do was go back and talk to his rivals, his contemporary rivals and his older rivals, people like Nadal and Djokovic, and also guys like Andy Roddick, who I thought was great, for the book. So, insightful and funny as he can be. Murat Safin, James Blake, people like that from the past, and really get their perspective on him now with some, time in the rearview mirror. And I wanted to talk to people that were, worked with him very closely. People like Paul Annacone, Peter Lundgren, Jose Higueras, all who coached him. I've had a lot of access to Severin Luthi over the years. And then also people like Pierre Paganini, who you already mentioned, his fitness trainer, who was so important for him and remains so. And I think is one of the big keys to his longevity. So I went back to all these people and I did, I think, over 80 interviews for the book specifically. And that was really, for me, the best part of the process, was to go back and hear what they thought now, looking at his career, why it worked out the way it did, and to really dig back into, things that I had forgotten or never knew, which was really his origin story and how he came about and how he was able to take this amazing talent and channel it and become a real rock, physically and to a large degree mentally as well. So that was really all about process and about the people who played him, coached him, and helped him. And I wanted to get inside their heads a lot. And so that's really the focus of the book.
Fantastic. Yeah, you definitely did a great job with that. And in terms of the whole process, I guess from soup to nuts, how many years would you say this took, this project for the book?
That's a good question. Yeah, I wrote about that in the acknowledgement section. That's the question that I've heard a lot from people since I finished it. I mean, the short answer is it took a year, I'd say, a little bit over a year, from getting the proposal approved by 12, which is the American publisher. And John Murray also bought part of the rights from the UK. And then doing the research, the 80 plus interviews, and about 6 months of writing. But actually, if you think about it, the book couldn't have been written without the experiences of the past. So really, it was 20 plus years in the making. My first real time watching Roger play, I kind of had a peripheral sense of him at the Wimbledon Juniors when he won that in 1998. I maybe saw him play a little bit then, but I really watched the first whole match I watched him play was 1999 French Open against Patrick Rafter, first round, Suzanne Lenglen court. That was his Grand Slam debut. So that's where I started. And after that, after watching him play there, an agent, I've actually forgotten who it was at this stage, but an agent told me I should go out and watch this guy, Wimbledon junior champion. Obviously, that was a good recommendation, but he said, this guy is going to be special. And I don't even represent him, so you can trust me, basically, was what he was saying. And so I said, I'll go out and watch. Yeah, I want to see him. And I stayed for the whole match. And I'm really glad I did, because now it's fun the way things worked out. But so I'd say 20 plus years in the making, really.
Awesome. And then I'm trying to remember, I've written so many notes on your book. And was it when you saw him play in Davis Cup for this versus USA in 2001 that you realized he'd be future number one, or was it earlier than that? And what was it that made you think that?
I've only had two men's players I've watched at an early stage of their career, and I was just convinced it's because the way they fit in the mind's eye and the way their games fit, and just looking at what they were doing to people whose games I knew, I was convinced they'd be number one. One was Murat Safin when he broke through at the French Open and played so well against experienced players like Agassi, and Roger at the first round of the Davis Cup 2001 in his home city of Basel in Switzerland. The USA went to play him. It wasn't a full strength USA team, but it was a good team. It was Todd Martin, Jan Michael Gamble. I think Justin Gimelstob, I believe, was playing doubles then. And Patrick McEnroe, I think, was in his first match ever as the U.S. Davis Cup captain. So they went in with a pretty strong team, and Roger just dismantled the U.S. and basically won that tie single-handedly, won all three rubbers. And I just watched him play from the press seats, and I remember just thinking, this guy's going to win Wimbledon for sure multiple times. And I'm not somebody who's like that in general. I'm not somebody who gets a lot of premonitions like that, but it was just clear to me watching him flow around the court, even though it wasn't grass, that his game was just perfect for grass. He just had this look of everywhere in the court. He flowed. He was able to move forward with, real effortless half volleys, angles, drop shots everywhere. So he just looked perfect for grass. And I just felt like his game was the number one's game. I think he was taking it to a new level because of all the things he could do in different parts of the court. And I guess with Safin, looking back on that, I think the reason I felt that was because he had just this two-handed backhand that was just next level. And that shots that guys were used to hitting that were safe against most guys, against Murat, suddenly were not safe. And so he was a game changer sort of thing. And Roger, just with his all court, ease and his all court flow, that to me was the next gear for tennis. And that's what I could see.
Gotcha, Chris. So fascinating. And you do talk about his relationship with Tiger Woods a bit later on. And I'm wondering, because Federer played several sports when he was young. I think his first love might have been soccer. And so I'm wondering, contrasting it with Tiger Woods. And there's a great book called Range by, I think, David Epstein, where, they contrast both, or he contrasts both athletes. Do you think Federer would have been as good of a tennis player if he didn't play other sports?
I think it comes down to personality type a lot with that. And I read David's book too, especially the chapters that related to this before I started researching my book. It's interesting. I make a point in the book about this actually, that I think both systems can work. I think I respect David's research a lot, and I think he's right, probably in terms of mental health, probably your body's long-term sustainability. I think range is a good thing. And I think maybe Roger's longevity applies to that. But then also, you see stories, where there's really an obsessive focus on one sport. Someone like Maria Sharapova, for example, who I don't think really played any other sports. She was a tennis player from start to finish. That's all she really did. And obviously trained on the side. And she still became a champion, a number one and multiple Grand Slam champion. Body broke down. Maybe there's some connection there. But in terms of Roger, I think knowing his personality, one of the things that really defines him is his need for variety and his need for novelty, something he talks about. And I think if you look at the whole arc of his life and his career, I think that's very evident. And he knows that about himself. So I don't think he's the kind of guy who could have been, monoculture, mono-focused on the sport. I think he needed that variety. And in some ways, I think he might even still need it. I don't think he does a lot of other sports now, but I know just the way he trains with Paganini, there's a lot of variety and intentional variety in what he does. So I think it was very helpful for his personality type to have the multiple sports. And it wasn't just soccer. It was, he played some squash, he played table tennis, played basketball, other sports that I think were also in the mix there. So he was always messing around with balls. That's what he's always said he liked. And he skied with his family when he was young too, and hiked. So I think he needed that to be fresh enough to embrace the tennis day to day. And he really focused on it big time from about the age of 14. And that became really his main focus. I think it was very helpful to him. And I think we always admire his flow around the court and his ability to make difficult things look easy and his natural grace. I think all that multiple sport activity really helped in that coordination and helped him with that ability to be, I'd say, spontaneous in his movements and spontaneous in his reactions.
Yeah, Chris, and speaking of the variety that Roger needed, it's interesting to read that. I'm trying to remember if it was Iklubins or Etienne, but it seemed like the whole staff would just tailor the programs to Roger and in an effort to give him the variety that he needed. I mean, do you think that there was any backlash or anything like that from the other kids? Like, do you think they kind of viewed it as, Roger's dictating how they're training us here or anything like that?
I didn't get a sense of that. I mean, I didn't obviously talk to everybody who was training in Écu Blanc. You're talking about the Swiss National Training Center,
right?
Where he went when he was in his teens. I think there could have been, but I'm not sure that the coaches were as open and clear about their intentions there as maybe they are now. Looking back on it, how much they told everybody, "Hey, we're doing this for Roger. We're going to make this very creative and varied just to make him happy." I'm not sure that was as evident as it is to them now. I honestly don't know the answer to that. But I think if you're an athlete and you're an aspiring tennis player, that's probably a pretty fun way to do it. It's better than just being super focused on just one thing. Obviously, some personality types will thrive in that. But I think the Roger rules, if you want to call them that, probably benefited more than just Roger in some respects too.
Yeah, definitely. And so I guess could you kind of go a little deeper into I wrote a quote down here, and I can't remember if you said it or somebody else, but the quote was, if Roger had been examined as a youngster, he might have been diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. So that was a great one. But just talk about, how he was as a teenager and any interesting stories you might want to bring up.
Well, I think, it's more talking to some of the early coaches about him. Obviously, the sad thing, and maybe we'll talk about him later, but Peter Carter, his Australian coach, would be the ultimate guy to interview about him now at this stage, but he sadly passed. So one of the biggest influences on Roger's career is no longer there to talk about him and explain that. But I know that that Peter sensed so much talent in him from talking to people who knew Peter, and sensed all this incredible nervous energy in Roger, and just this sort of, almost like it was boiling out of his body, all this energy. And there was a bit of mischief in there too. He has definitely a prankish side and a sense of humor where, he played tricks on people and loves to laugh, loves to joke around, did from an early age. But it was just a lot of nervous energy. And I remember there was a coach named Christopher Clarey, who was a big part of the early part of the book. And he was running the National Training Center, the tennis side of it, in Écu-Blanc, which is on, near Lausanne in Switzerland. And it's French speaking. And Roger went there without speaking French. So it was a very difficult situation for him as a young person at, age 14, to have to go in there and deal with not being part of the local culture, not understanding what was going on. It took him, a better part of a year to get conversant in the language. So I think that was hard for him. So maybe he was in a more physical mode already because he couldn't express himself fully. But Christophe Rice, who was running a lot of the practices and watching Roger's progress, would talk about just having a hard time getting Roger to sit still long enough to look him in the eye and listen to what he was saying. He would sort of be trying to get his point across to him, and he'd see Roger looking at him and sort of, he couldn't keep his gaze for very long because he could just sense he was sort of almost bubbling over with this nervous energy. And so when I make was kind of a half joke about the ADD situation, it's also because I think he really had a hard time, just sitting still and focusing on the task at hand. I think that's probably why he wasn't terribly academic either. I think he was somebody who had a hard time in the classroom, sitting still, focusing on something. He wanted to be out and physically active and just on the move, doing it, expressing his gift. And so I think it took a long time for that to be manageable for a lot of the coaches that worked with them. And I think there's a story in the book, which is a great one, of him in Écu-Blanc in the early years. And he's coming to practice. He's finished his classes and he's coming into practice, and the older guys are practicing. And he's just hitting the ball against this container. I think it was a metal container, or it's making a huge amount of noise. Just bang, bang, bang. And Christophe Rice, the head coach, says, "Roger, stop it." And so Roger stops for a little while. And I think blood starts to boil again. He gets nervous, starts to hit against the wall again. Bang, bang, bang. Roger, stop. Roger, stop. And basically it's kind of agreed that if he starts it again, they're going to carry him away. So sure enough, Roger starts again. The whole pack of players and everybody kind of descends on Roger, carries him up to the shower stall upstairs, like they're going to make him all wet and douse him. It's unclear whether they actually did or not, but that gives you an example of what kind of nervous energy Roger had at that stage, and just how hard it was for him to kind of control what he was doing. He wanted to play. He wanted to be out there. Didn't want to sit around talking tactics too much at that stage. Obviously, it changed. So I think those are pretty key indicators of the type of personality. And if you look at it, what's carried him to age 40, that he turned 40 quite recently, maybe it's that nervous energy and all that bubbling up is what's helped carry him through. You don't see it so much anymore. It's been years since you really see that kind of thing in him. He's contained it so much, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But whatever it was, that core energy that's in him, I think has been very important to his longevity too.
Yeah, I agree with that, Chris. And yeah, a lot of great stories, hiding tree houses, slicing a curtain. Yeah, you'll want to get the book to listen about, to read these things. So tell me why Federer switched his dentist, when he was a teenager, and the importance of surrounding yourself with the right people.
Yeah, that's a good story too. That's one of my favorite stories in the book, actually. He told me that one at one of our last interviews, actually, most recent interviews. I think he was also trying to explain why he's lasted a long time. When we talked about this. And the story is basically that when he turned pro, or decided to kind of become a full-time tennis player at age 16, and, basically hire his own people and start to kind of really head out there and do what he needed to do. He, 16 or 17, I forgot the exact age, but he went to Basel to his longtime dentist, and basically, like somebody's known you for a long time since you're a kid. The guy was asking him, I think while he was working on Roger's mouth, actually, as Roger says. It's not the easiest place to have the conversation, but he said, "So what are you up to now?" And Roger basically told him that I'm playing tennis. I'm doing tennis. And the guy said, Is that all you're doing? I mean, come on, what else are you doing? And Roger goes, "No, I'm really just playing tennis. That's all I'm doing." So maybe for an American or French person or somebody else, it wouldn't be such an issue. But for the Swiss, who are conservative and very education driven and very sort of conventional success oriented. I think it was a hard thing for them to manage, for a lot of people to realize that Roger was going to be a full-time tennis player. And basically the very telling thing was he decided never to go back to the guy. He walked out once, I guess he got his work done. Hopefully he finished it. And then he left and he said, I'm not going to go back. I'm changing tennis, because he wanted, in his words, somebody with positive energy, somebody who's going to, believe in his project, somebody who was going to encourage him. And he just didn't want to be around negative energy. And I think that's something that he's followed throughout his career. I've called it like a negative energy detector. He's somebody who doesn't want to surround himself with that. It drains his energy. I don't think he minds constructive criticism. I think he's probably more open to that now than he might have been in his very early years. He might have wanted to hear more rah-rah. And then I think over time he realized the value of the criticism when it comes from the right place. But he did not want negative people. And he wanted people who would sort of allow him to dream his dreams and dream big and not get in the way of that. So the dentist story, I think, exemplifies all of that. And I imagine there were other people like that along the way. But that one is certainly very telling.
Yeah, for sure. And you talk about this, after that story too, but how do you figure out, when advice is like being realistic versus, being negative? Like, how do you find that proper team that has the right sort of attitude for you?
Well, I mean, your question is a good one. I think what's interesting is that you got to have a little bit of perspective on this. Roger's looking at it through his lens, the wisdom that he's acquired. And I do think there are a lot of lessons you can learn from Roger for all of us. But you also got to realize this guy is an ethereal, otherworldly talent in tennis. So things that he did might have worked anyway because he was so good. And so that some of the things that he tried to do that he saw that worked for him might not have worked for somebody else because they just wouldn't have been good enough. And maybe other guys might need someone to break them down and make them really realize that their game isn't in the right direction, or they don't really have what it takes. But he clearly did have what it took. So I think it could be a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy there too. But what I think you can get out of it, though, is it is very important. I think if you're going to go off on a path as a young person like that and take a big risk. He had his family behind him. Obviously, he could have gone back to school. He left school at 16, so he could have gone back to school in Switzerland. And that was kind of the pact he made with his parents, especially his father, that if he didn't reach a certain level in several years, he would have to go back and go to school. Obviously, it worked out well for him. But I think the important thing is you need to really surround yourself with quality people. And you have to give those quality people enough time to do the job properly and accept that you're going to have learning curves in terms of how it's going to work for you with your group, and that as a group you can evolve. But you got to have really smart, I think, wise choices in terms of who's the right person for you. Obviously, it helps when you're a great talent. People are going to gravitate to you. Some of the people who came to the National Training Center in Bienne, which is where he went after Écu Blanc, came there because they knew Roger was going to be there. These are coaches like Peter Lundgren, who coached him later on, and a guy named Paul Dorochenko, who was a fitness trainer, who also had worked with Sergi Bruguera, former French Open champion, and a lot of other players down the road. They came knowing that Roger was going to be involved, and that was very interesting to them. So talent also attracts talent. So you might have people of more knowledge and better quality. They're going to gravitate to you because they know you have a big upside. But I think for him, he made a lot of good choices through the years. He really did. And maybe he was advised by his parents early on or people he trusted, like Peter Carter, but he seemed to have a good instinct about people and about the ones he should trust.
Yeah, definitely a lot of good choices. Some good timing and fortunes, and it's obviously been an incredible career. I just want to go back to what I mentioned in the beginning of the interview, which is the influence of fitness trainer. I forgot his first name already, but Paganini, and just kind of the different type of style of training he did and how that has contributed to Federer's footwork and fitness and longevity in the game.
Yeah, it's Pierre Paganini is his name, and he was a track athlete, decathlon guy, trained with one of the better athletics trainers in Switzerland, and he also was a guy who was very interested in coaching soccer initially, and sort of gravitated to tennis a bit by default as time went on. But I think Pierre, from having interviewed him a few times at length, is a very deep person, deep thinker, pretty philosophical. You get kind of goosebumps talking to him because he just has this very measured way and a very inspiring way to speak. It's not like, hey, let's go out and run some push-ups. It's much more thoughtful than that. I don't know how he is day to day with Roger, but when you're talking to him, it's very thoughtful and intentional. And I think he brought that to bear with Roger. And Roger was not the first guy he worked with. He worked with Marc Rosset, who was the leading Swiss player when Roger emerged. He was top 10 guy, won the gold medal at the Olympics by surprise in Barcelona in 1992 in singles. And he was a pretty big early influence on Roger's career. But Paganini worked with Rosset. And I don't know, I mean, you got a pretty tennis nerd listening group, I imagine. So the Maleva sisters, there were three of them, all top 10 players, kind of the Williams sisters before the Williams sisters from Bulgaria. And one of them, the oldest, Manuela, married a Swiss coach and was also training in Écu Blanc, which is where Pierre Paganini was. And he worked with Manuela Maleva as well and helped her really hit a new level. But I think Pierre's thing was, I'm going to explain to you why I'm doing this. I'm going to get you to buy into it. And then I'm going to surprise you a lot. I'm going to give you variety, different things, so your body is challenged. But above all, what I'm going to do is everything that I do is going to relate directly to what you need in terms of fitness. Everything that you're going to do, be it lifting, be it sprinting, be it any kind of movement, is going to have a direct correlation to your sport. And that would be tennis in the case of Roger, obviously, and Malevas and Rosset. And so I know that's sort of the way things are done now, more and more. I'm not so sure that when Paganini came along and you talked to players from that era, that wasn't the way it was always done then. So whether Pierre was the ultimate innovator, I don't know. But Pierre certainly brought that to bear in terms of Roger, and it was a perfect fit. And I think he did everything he did was coordination and movement. That was his big focus. So if you're going to be sprinting, you're going to be doing it while catching a ball, or you're going to be doing it while trying to solve a mental problem, or you're going to be doing explosive endurance, which is sort of his term for it, where you're trying to short bursts, a lot of plyometrics, jumping, explosive movements, a lot of quick cardio, get your heart rate up, stop, quick cardio again, because that's what tennis is, right? It's a stop and start game. And there's a lot of long breaks in there. So as Pierre would put it, you're not sprinting for 3 hours in a 3-hour tennis match. You're sprinting for short bursts within that 3 hours. And so you really should train ideally to be just in that mode. And I think there was still in the 80s and early 90s this idea of let's go for a run, or let's lift some heavy weights, or things like that really don't directly apply to tennis all that much. You can argue that philosophy worked pretty well for Gil Reyes and Andre Agassi. I mean, those guys pumped some serious iron. I think it was also a psychological benefit for Andre as well, with heavy weights and setting personal records and just a really solid body, core, big pecs and all those kinds of things. I personally, listening to Pierre, and other people don't really see the value in that, but it worked for Andre, and he had a long career. So you have to kind of tailor it to your people. But in Roger's case, almost everything that he did from a pretty early age, because he met Pierre quite young and worked with him from the beginning of his pro career, really, was done with that intentionality and that very specific tennis focus. And again, why did he get to 40? I'm sure that definitely has played a big role in it. And he said as much. Pierre's influence on him and his ability not to burn him out, to know, with their communication being what it was and their trust being what it was, knowing what the limits were and where he could push, should push. And I think they had a very open feedback loop between them where, Roger would almost sense what Pierre might be thinking and let him know that wasn't going to work that day. And Pierre would instinctively know what Roger could handle at any given moment. But there was always that element of surprise. And if you look at Roger's career all the way through, from a very young age till now, the variety is very important to his mental freshness. And Pierre got that and gave him that. And yeah, I mean, it's honestly very inspiring to talk to Pierre. And I think that's another reason why it's lasted so long in the relationship, because the guy is just a very interesting human.
Fantastic. Again, going back to this incredible team that Federer is able to be a part of. So, in terms of the mental game now, I think it was looked down upon at the time to work with a sports psychologist, but Roger, and I keep interchanging Roger and Federer, but Roger did work with a sports psychologist. So, talk about that influence and how it was looked upon, and any other insights on that part of his journey.
Yeah, that's a really interesting part of his career, and not a lot of people know about that. I mean, honestly, he has talked very little about it through the years. It's not something he brings up a whole lot spontaneously. I don't think he feels any sort of regret or sense of shame about it, but I think he takes a lot of pride in his mental strength and his ability to overcome problems and issues. And I think he didn't want to be dependent on anything. But I think at that time, it was when he had his temper issues and his problems controlling his emotions as a young player in his teens. And there was a sense that he just was having a hard time channeling things and controlling things, and he wasn't able to express his best tennis or even be very happy on the court at all because he was just so tied in, as so many players are in the sport, which can drive us all nuts. In his case, it was making him miserable a lot of the time on the court, I think, in terms of his ability to manage the emotions and the expectations that he had for himself. So I think Peter Carter, his boyhood coach, and others who were involved at the time at the National Training Center in Biel. I'll use the term Biel because it's actually called Biel Bien is the term. It's a bilingual city, French and German. So it's actually the official name is Biel Bien, believe it or not. But Biel is the German term, so we'll use that. But so in Biel, basically the team there decided, also included a guy I'm sure you've heard of, Sven Groneveld, who great Dutch coach who's worked with a lot of top players, including Sharapova and Mary Pierce and Rosetsky, and is now going to coach Bianca Andreescu of Canada, which is an interesting decision. But Sven was involved as a tennis director in the Swiss Federation when Roger came to Biel. And Sven told me that the feeling was Roger needed some help from the outside. And I don't think his parents were able to give him what he needed in terms of the kind of peace of mind and the tools basically to be able to handle the emotions and try to get on the road to controlling his temper and manage those things. So they basically, from what I understand, they were, reading a newspaper article and came across this young guy named Christian Marcoli, who used to be a soccer player and a very good one, and a striker with FC Basel, which is one of the best Swiss clubs based in Roger's hometown, one he would have watched play hundreds of times as a kid in person and on TV. And he's still a big fan. And so this guy, because he was very young and his career had ended because of an injury, I think he seemed to Peter Carter and to Rogers the kind of guy that he'd be able to relate to. And he was just starting his sports psychology practice. And at the time, there really weren't that many performance psychologists or sports psychologists in Switzerland at all. He might have been one of the very first, Christian Marcoli. And again, I interviewed him for the book, and I won't go into all of it here because the book will make it more interesting too. But I think, again, a very interesting, inspiring person, much like Pierre, really. I talked to Christian for an hour and a half for the book, and he was one of those guys who's got a great perspective on things through his own experiences and difficulties. And a lot of what he decided to do in his practice was to do for athletes the things that he didn't get done for him when he was an athlete. That was his motivation. He wanted to give them a platform and a structure to be able to express their best on the field or on the court or whatever it was. So I think even though he was quite young, I think that Roger was able to come across him. And they also from Basel, Roger's hometown, the guy, speaking his language, Swiss German, which is his most comfortable language of them all. And I think he was able to not solve the problem for Roger. They worked together for a couple of years pretty regularly. I think he gave him tools to manage the on-court stress. Stuff as direct as what you do with your eyes when you're on the court. You don't let your gaze stray away. You keep them focused on the space in front of you until the point begins in order to help your concentration. Breathing techniques, things like that. And then a lot of the things they worked on, have remained confidential. Roger didn't want Marcoli talking about it. Marcoli has respected that. And when we talked for the book, he kept, to his credit, saying a lot. This is still confidential. I'm not gonna breach that confidentiality. But he talked in general terms. And I think he just he could tell that Roger had very, very high expectations for himself and very big dreams as a tennis player. And the idea was to help him express his get on the road to expressing his best tennis. And they didn't get all the way there because Roger still had some emotional, temperamental problems after they stopped working together in his late teens. But I think he did give him a good platform and helped him quite a bit.
Yeah, for sure. And Christian, it was nice that he said that, his goal was to not have the players, have to rely on him all the time and to at some point have to say, goodbye, essentially. So I found that very, very honorable,
That's true. I don't know how many sports psychologists, performance psychologists take that approach. I mean, obviously you're giving away your paycheck, but I think he had a good long-term vision and he's had a lot of success. I mean, Roger was a short time in his career at the beginning, but he's also worked with some of the best Swiss athletes, Olympic champions in skiing, and their national team goalkeeper obviously had a pretty good Euro recently. I'm not remembering all the names here, but these guys are top Swiss athletes, and he's played a big role with them, and golfers as well. So I think he's taken his method and had a lot of success with it. Written a number of books too.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. Roger's ascension and improvement. And, one other quote that I'm going to bring up is from, as you mentioned, Marc Grosset. So he said, "What fascinated me about Roger is he manages to live in the present and has a great ability to take things as they come. He lives in the moment, experiences it fully, takes pleasure in it, and then finishes it and moves on to the next thing." So how does he do that? I mean, that's really hard. And I wish I could do that all the time, but what enabled him to become like this?
Well, just to your point about what you said about yourself, that to me, as a longtime journalist who's covered him for a long time, I didn't realize that until I started writing the book. There are a number of takeaways for me from this process that could apply to me or to people I care about and things that you can learn from. And this is an aspirational thing from watching him operate that I would like to incorporate into my own life. And I'm trying to do, because I feel like that is the thing, especially in this era of this thing. Basically, we are just so challenged in our focus and concentration and distractions. And really, having spent a lot of time around Roger as a journalist, the guy's there with you. I can't tell you how many times I've done interviews with other athletes when the phone's been going off or their head's twisting around, or you can sense their leg getting jittery because they have something else they're thinking about or they want to get someplace. He is not like that at all. He is looking at you. He is focused on your conversation and in a very relaxed manner. None of this stuff, none of this. It's open to the conversation, open to the moment. And I never felt rushed talking to him. And I can tell you, I've felt rushed in plenty of interviews. I've interviewed thousands of athletes in many different sports over the years. And he really stands out. There are others like him, but he seems like, I don't know, I'd like to know this. If there was somebody along the way who counseled him early on and said, "Hey, you're doing it, do it right." Maybe it was his parents as a form of politeness and a form of focus, but it's a real hallmark of his. And I guess how he does it, I like to say the guy, I think I use this line in the book too, and I believe this. I feel like it's planned spontaneity, as weird as that might sound. It's an oxymoron, but I think it is. I think he knows that he wants to be in the moment. He wants to give things his full attention. And the only way to do that is to know when he wants to be that way, when he has to be that way, and sort of take care of the things that might be distractions and have his life organized in such a way that when he's in front of something, whether it's a sponsor dinner, whether it's a match, whether it's a practice session, whether it's a journalist, he's there. And that takes planning and self-control. And I think that's the key. And he's Swiss South African. We can't forget that. He's not just Swiss. I mean, his mom's South African. He has I would say American qualities as well in terms of that sort of exuberance and extroverted qualities that he has. But he also has a very rigorous, I think, Swiss side to him as well. Despite that crazy bubbling energy, there's also inside there a structured person. And I think both those things have played a role in what he's been able to do. But I would call it, a planned spontaneity. So that's kind of the mantra I've taken out of writing this book is that, I'm just going to aim for the same thing. When I'm doing it, whatever it is, I want to try to think a bit like he does, in that that thing is really all that matters at the moment. And the other stuff, when I'm done with this, we'll move on to this. So I think that's really a takeaway for all of us from what his success has brought.
Extremely important, Chris. Yeah, thanks for discussing that in detail. So Roger is obviously in the beginning of his career, a lot of pressure from choosing which coach he would pick to some setbacks. So he did have a few streaks of several first round losses in a row. So how was he able to bounce back from that to then eventually, obviously, reach the pinnacle?
Yeah, he had some tough stretches there. I mean, people can tend to think about 2001, Wimbledon fourth round, Pete Sampras, huge winning streak, 7-time champ at Wimbledon, and Roger beating him in 5 sets in that classic match. As sort of that's when it all began, and it all started to roll for Roger. That's not really the way it went. There was quite a bit of difficulty and problem managing his game, making the right shot selections, and controlling his emotions, finding the consistency, and it took him quite a while. One of the key elements in that maturation process was obviously Peter Carter's death, which happened in the summer, Northern Hemisphere summer of 2002. He was killed in a Jeep accident or a car accident in South Africa when he was on safari down there near Kruger National Park, and a trip he took as a honeymoon on the Federer's recommendation. So I think when Peter died, Roger had taken on Peter Lundgren, another Peter, as his coach in his early years on the pro circuit. It was a very difficult decision not to work with Peter Carter, who'd been in kind of a journeyman Australian pro, by all accounts, a great guy and a very great tennis mind in a lot of ways, and really shaped Roger's game. But Peter's death changed so many things for Roger. And I think even though when he died in 2002, I don't think that Roger's game immediately benefited. Of course, there was a lot to absorb and deal with. But I think that was the key moment that made him the player he became. I think because of Peter's wasn't a sacrifice. Peter, he didn't plan to die, and was a horrible tragedy in every respect. But I think it gave Roger this sense that he needed to honor Peter's memory, and he needed to do justice to the talent that Peter always saw in him. And obviously intense emotions because of the way it all played out and the way it happened, and the fact that they weren't working directly together when he died. And I imagine, deep down, Roger would have thought their paths would cross again in some coaching role down the road. That was never going to happen. So I think with all his human qualities, Roger's a very sensitive person and a very empathetic person. And I think he set out from the moment Peter died, or pretty soon afterward, to commit his talent and to get the most out of it, kind of in honor of Peter. It might have happened anyway. I personally don't think it would have to the same degree. I think that was really a key thing. It's tragic that Peter never got to see him play his best, but I don't know if Roger would have played his best if Peter had been around. It's just a really paradoxical thing. But I feel like that gave him, he kind of grew up from that in a way, and it gave him I'd call it a mission statement in a way. And he wrote to people who knew Peter Carter. There's a part in the book there, Peter Smith, who coached Peter Carter in his youth. And Roger wrote an email shortly after Peter Carter's death and said, "Hey, I want you to know I'm going to do all I can to maximize my talent in honor of Peter. And I think about it when I'm on the court." And Roger's talked about that too. And then Wimbledon, 2003, after some difficulties, it all came together for him. And that from there, it just started to flow. It took a while. He had to manage expectations, emotions, his game. And that was another part of the process. But the Peter Carter thing is the launching pad to the kind of consistency and incredible excellence that he showed over so long.
It's incredible insight, and really touching to hear that. And yeah, it's only fitting. I mean, as you mentioned, such a huge influence, and Roger's strokes basically are, they look like Peter's. Yeah, that's very, very interesting and cool to hear. So regarding Federer and Nadal, and it's really cool that you also put a lot into researching the background of Rafa and talking about him and everything. It was very interesting. I think it was the first singles match with Nadal when Federer was number one that Nadal, I guess, demolished Federer. So yeah, that was surprising, I guess, to a lot of people. And you talk in depth about the announcer, cutting off mid sentence and
yeah, exactly. John Barrett, who's a great announcer. Yeah, John Barrett was there. Like you said, I mean, this is John Barrett, who was the voice of Wimbledon for the BBC for many years. He was a fantastic announcer and was a great player in his own right. So he knows the game. But it was a situation where Nadal, this young teenage talent, people knew he was good, but Roger was the guy. He just emerged now as the dominant player in the game, obviously a great hardcourt player. And he's coming into Miami and he's the big favorite. And Nadal's coming out there to kind of get a tennis lesson, right? That's the way it's supposed to be. And you can hear John Barrett, who's doing the commentary with Doug Adler for the ATP feed, the world feed. And John sort of saying, is there a reasonable chance that, Roger could be troubled by this guy today? And basically the conversation starts to be like, well, so let's explain to you why. And then as they're talking, this point begins and Nadal, this is early in the match, and Roger just hits this inside out forehand that would normally finish off a point, and Nadal's over there and with his lefty forehand gets to the ball and rips it back twice as hard. And then another shot that should have been a winner in the rally, and not Rafa's there and hits that, ends up winning the point with passing shots and just a barrage of things. And it was almost like the future was right there in that rally. And teenage Rafa playing Roger and surprising him and then taking his best shots and turning them on his head and winning the rally. And then Barrett and Adler just stopped talking. And they never talk about that again. And the match plays out and Rafa wins. And we probably never talked about it again ever. It was just like there was the moment where we're going to question with this kid's talent and whether he was going to be a threat. And then suddenly the rally just proved that he was, and that was it. Obviously, Rafa took a while because of injuries to win his first French Open, and he lost to Roger in the Miami final the following year. So Roger had plenty of moments on hard courts in that stage. But I mean, you watch that match. I watched it for the book again. It wasn't Roger wasn't at his best. He was coming off a little bit of an illness, I guess. You can't always tell the speed people are moving at. But Nadal's shot making and just confidence and body language was like, I'm taking this. You're not intimidating me in the least. And it's interesting because Rafa is almost 5 years younger than Roger. But because of Roger's timeline, Roger's not the guy that Rafa grew up watching. He grew up watching Carlos Moya, who's from Mallorca like Rafa. It was kind of his role model. He would have seen Sampras and Agassi and those kinds of guys. But Roger wasn't the dominant player when Rafa was a teenager growing up in Mallorca. His dominance kind of happened a little before Rafa emerged. So I don't think Rafa was intimidated by anybody anyway, but it wasn't like he was watching his childhood idol out there like Roger was when he played Sampras at Wimbledon. It was a whole different dynamic. But it was just, you're watching the guy Rafa play and you just champion, just playing each point as he has for almost 20 years with full intensity, full intention. And if Roger didn't bring his best stuff, he wasn't winning the point. So that was a real revelation to watch that match again. And there were a couple of moments like that, few moments of matches that I got to watch. Another great joy of doing this book was going back and watching a lot of the old matches that were just amazing spectacles. I mean, Hewitt-Federer matches. Hewitt's been lost in the sands of time a little bit, but some of their duels were spectacular. There's a Shanghai match, the Masters, the Masters Cup, which is the ATP finals now. Just a high level tennis, amazing defense on both players' part. And then the great Safin Federer Aussie Open semifinal, just pure pleasure to watch that match. So that Roger match was in that same sort of short list too.
Yeah, Nadal not intimidated at all. He beat Boya in their meeting, and he, as a 14-year-old, I think he beat Pat Cash in like a exhibition. Yeah. That's a great story. Yeah. Yeah. Cash came to play Becker in exhibition in Mallorca. Cash, former Wimbledon champion. Becker as well. Becker had a house in Mallorca, and so they were coming to do this thing at the local club. Becker couldn't play last minute, looking for a sub. So they tell Pat, hey, there's this young guy on the island. It's pretty good. We use him as a fill-in. And Pat's like, sure, we'll save it. We'll give him a little hit around. And he basically goes out to play, and this kid shows up. It's Rafa. I think he was 14. I think that's right. And he just like, the first point was like flashy forehand, vamos, fist pump.
And Pat's like, whoa, he ends up having to fight for his life against this kid. And he ends up calling his agent right after the match and telling him, you better, sign this kid. Even unfortunately, he was already signed, but telling his sponsors, get this kid. Nike was already all over it, but it was for Pat a revelation. It's a great story. I mean, it was just thought he'd go out there and be able to give the kid a little hit around, but Rafa wasn't having it.
One of many, many great stories in the book. So kind of a twofer question. What are Federer's thoughts, genuine thoughts on Rafa, and then maybe contrast that? I mean, if it is a contrast with Djokovic.
I'd love to give you the full answer on that. In his deepest, personal thoughts, I can't give you those. And he may give me a media journalist answer in some of these situations. My sense of it, just being around those guys and seeing them all interact to some degree from my limited vantage point, which is still a privileged vantage point because of the access I've had to these people, I think to some degree. I don't want to be definitive here is what I'm saying, because I don't know for sure. But my sense with Rafa is that the language barrier was real in the early years. I mean, Rafa's English was not very good at all. And Roger's Spanish is really not very good. So their communication was very limited in the early years for sure. I love that, the classic video when they just started giggling and laughing and all that. I mean, Rafa's still figuring things out, the language, but it's just hilarious and they make it work. I think it was very tough for Roger to accept that his moment had come and he'd been told he was the one for a long time. And he believed it. And I think he'd come to believe it. And then Rafa shows up and rocks his world. I mean, that was not easy to deal with mentally. And I'm sure there was a lot of, difficult moments accepting that and accepting Rafa's arrival and his long running presence and some humiliating defeats like the 2008 French Open final. So I don't know if they would have called it a friendship in the early years by any means, but I think over time through those matches, much like McEnroe and Borg, really, I think the fact that they shared those incredible matches, the two Wimbledon finals and the Rome final and other matches, I think they realized that almost in a way, as a collective unit, they were stronger and more appealing and had more resonance than they did individually in some way. And I think they felt that linkage. And over time, Rafa's English got pretty good. And I think over time they realized, I point this out in the book, and that was a revelation for me as I wrote it, how much they have in common. They really do have a lot in common. Their backgrounds, they both, were soccer players, other sports, could easily have gone that direction. They both come from tight families, both come from multilingual backgrounds as well, with in terms of just the Mallorcan culture and mainland Spanish culture and all that Rafa was navigating. Rafa obviously had a different background in the sense that his uncle, Miguel Angel, was a great soccer player, and with Barcelona and the national team from Spain. So he had a role model in his family who was a great athletic success. Roger didn't have that, but they have a lot of similarities in terms of how they process things through their careers, and their fitness trainers too. Or Paganini's fitness approach is similar to Rafa's guys' fitness approach, and so I think there's a lot of stuff that they could share, and they realize kind of like a time lapse photography or sort of like a photograph developing in the darkroom, and over time it becomes clearer and clearer what it is. I think their relationship became clearer and clearer as they came along. And I think they really, now you sense, talking to both of them about each other recently, it's just an immense amount of respect. And I think it is a friendship now. Is it a close friendship like you'd have with your buddies from childhood or your friend you're not competitive with that you can just sit back and be 100% yourself with? No, but I think it's a friendship. And it's one of the coolest things about tennis right now is the way those two guys get along and respect each other, and yet still will try to beat each other's brains out on the court. Novak, I think, is a more complex thing. Novak comes from a totally different place than either of those guys. My sense from Roger was not as much in common there and more of an edge to that rivalry. He's never expressed that in clear terms to me or anybody else I've ever heard, but just the way he's reacted to some of the losses, some of the sort of the frustration that he represented, the 2 match point losses, both of those at the US Open, the way he responded to some of that stuff. He hasn't responded to too many defeats like that in his career. I think Novak gets under his skin in a way with his game, what he can do against Roger's strengths. in a way that Rafa, who can do some of the same things, doesn't do. Partly because Rafa has always respected Roger openly, very much so in terms of how he talks about him. Always been deferential, almost past logic in some ways, where he's sort of talked about Roger being the greatest player in the world after he's beaten him, 3-2-2 or whatever it is. Right. And I remember as a journalist going, come on, Rafa, you're not kidding anybody. But that's been Rafa's approach. And he's only as good as his next match or his next point. And I think he did have a tremendous amount of respect for Roger. And he also realized that might have been the smartest approach. But I think Novak could destabilize Roger sometimes. And I think I got to him.
Yeah, some interesting comments too from the family of Novak, which you should get the book for that too to read. But about Roger, obviously. But
different approach. You didn't hear the Nadal saying those kind of things for sure. Yeah.
No, I haven't seen that. Chris, I could talk to you about this book for 10 hours, but I know you have a busy day ahead. So I guess I just want to ask you if there's anything else you want to mention about the book, anything just in general. Let you have the floor at this moment.
Well, I'm touched that you brought up Rafa and Novak, because I feel like the book it's the Master is a name, and it is a Federer biography, and a pretty detailed one, I hope, and hopefully gives you the whole cradle to age 40 kind of look at him. I think his main body of work now is done. I'm not saying he won't keep playing. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe he doesn't even know the answer to that at the moment we're talking. But I do think his main achievements in tennis are behind him now. So I think it's a good time to have written this book for that reason. But really, it is a book about this whole era in men's tennis, which is an exceptional era. I don't know how old you are. You look young and vigorous, but definitely I've covered tennis for 30 plus years, and I covered the Sampras, Agassi, Michael Chang, Jim Courier era. Saw all that, and I finished that up and I go, well, I'm not going to be able to top this. It's great to be having done that so soon in my career. Well, this tops it. The consistent achievement of these guys. If a guy like Andy Murray has become almost an afterthought, considering how great a player he is and how much he achieved, it tells you something about how good those three guys, Rafa, Roger, and Novak have been. And the book really dives into that, and also dives into the guys who couldn't make it, like Safin. I mean, they made it. Won 2 Grand Slams, hit number 1 briefly. Roddick winning the US Open, hitting number 1. But it's interesting to see the guys that came up against Roger, and then later Novak and Rafa too, who couldn't quite join that club, and why, and how they view it all. So for me, I think that's the richness of the book. And I'm hoping that my dream would be 10 years from now, if somebody wants to know about this era, a lot about Roger, but about this era, that this book would be interesting to them still. That's kind of the spirit in which I wrote it. So there's a lot of Rafa and a lot of Novak, as you mentioned in the book, more than you might expect from looking at the cover or looking at the thing. So I hope people get some enjoyment out of that part of it too.
Definitely, Chris. I think I feel like you should sell like many millions, or I mean, if you're a Federer fan, you got to get this book. Even if you're a fan of just the men's game, or you should get this book. I mean, it's really, like I said earlier, very detailed, a lot of great stories, a lot of chuckling along the way. Like when they told Rosé after he won, like the Switzerland, like the biggest tournament there, like we're not sending you to the Easter Bowl because you're just not good enough. I mean, that was hilarious. But anyways, yeah, just a great book, and I highly encourage everybody to check it out. Again, Christopher Clarey is the author of The Master, The Long Run and Beautiful Game of Roger Federer. I really hope that you all enjoy this book when you pick it up, and I really enjoyed it myself. So, Chris, thanks a lot for your time. Hope to see you at a live tourney one of these days, or talk to you again on the podcast. And thanks so much for your time. And again, kudos on the great job you did with this book.
Hey, thank you for your interest, and those words really touched me. I appreciate it. It was really a big challenge to take a career as big and long as Roger's and try to, boil it down to a few hundred pages, but it was something I got a lot of satisfaction out of at the end, and learned a lot myself. So I appreciate what you said. Thanks so much.
No problem. Thank you, Chris. All the best, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Okay, great.
All right. I really hope you enjoyed my interview with Christopher Clarey on The Master, The Long Run and Beautiful Game of Roger Federer. And again, I can't recommend enough Christopher's new book that just came out day before the publication of this podcast episode, so August 24th. And yes, you can pick up the book at by just going to the show notes page. You can just click in your app that you're using to listen to the show, or go to tennisfiles.com/213 or tennisfiles.com/podcast and just click on the show notes page and you will find the link. So again, that's The Master, the Long Run and Beautiful Game of Roger Federer. Definitely check it out. And if you enjoyed this episode, I would definitely appreciate it if you left a review for the Tennis Files podcast. Just do that on your app of choice that you use to listen to the show again. And let me leave you with a quote, as I often love to do at the end of the show. And this quote is from James Swanwick. And James said, "When you double your rate of failure, you double your rate of success." Really love that. Highly applicable, both in Roger's career and your own career, my career, everybody's. The more you try different things and come out of your shell, that's when you're going to learn a lot. Obviously sometimes you'll fail at first, but you'll find a way to persevere. So great quote there. All right. Well, again, thanks so much for listening. And if you want a great read, pick up the book, pick up Christopher's book on Roger Federer. And with that, I hope you have a great day, great week, and keep improving your tennis game. And I'll see you on the next episode of the Tennis Files podcast. This is Mehrban Aranshad signing out.